Her daughter's text was sharp, cold. "You're not invited to the reception. People ask too many questions." Vivian didn't flinch. She typed a single response, then hit send. By morning, her daughter's perfect world would unravel. Vivian had been silent for too long. This time, the questions weren't for her. They were for Maya. And she wasn't backing down. "We're just getting started, but before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from? These stories aren't just mine. They're mirrors. Drop your city in the comments, and if you believe in second chances, hit subscribe." Vivian's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She wasn't sure why she even looked. Wasn't it always some trivial notification or a reminder about the wedding? But today, her fingers moved of their own accord, as though bracing for impact. The message preview was right there on the screen, clear as day. "You're not invited to the reception. People ask too many questions." Her breath caught. She didn't even realize she was holding it. The phone slipped from her grasp and fell onto the countertop with a soft thud. For a second, it seemed like the whole world had frozen. That single line had more weight than any word she'd heard in years. Maya, her daughter, the woman she had raised, loved, and sacrificed for. And now this, not even a pretense of civility, of respect, just an icy, final statement. Vivian stood there, staring at the phone. The buzz of her pulse drowned out all other sounds. Her body felt foreign to her, like she was outside herself, watching from the corner of the room. The sting in her chest grew, but she swallowed it down, pushed it somewhere deep, somewhere she could hide it. She wasn't going to let Maya's words crush her. Not this time. Not again. She picked up the phone, staring at the message as if it held the answer to something much deeper. "People ask too many questions." Was that the reason? Was she too much of a complication for Maya's perfect image? Too much of a reminder of the things she didn't want to acknowledge? She glanced over at Ethan. Her son had been quiet, as usual, sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee. He'd heard the phone buzz, but instead of offering support or asking about the message, he didn't even look up. The air between them felt like a weight, something too heavy to lift, even though it had always been there, silently pressing down. Her hands trembled, but only slightly. She let out a long breath, one that tasted bitter, and opened her contacts list, scrolling to Grace's name. It was the only number she trusted right now, the only person who might understand. She typed quickly, her fingers stiff as they hit the screen. "It's happening again." She stared at the message, holding it for a long moment before pressing send. Grace would know what she meant. Grace always knew. The phone buzzed again. Another message. This time from Maya. Her heart sank as she saw it flash on the screen. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, Mom." Vivian's fingers hovered over the keys, but the words didn't come. She took another breath and set the phone down, then stood up, pacing slowly across the room. The hurt, the confusion, the anger, it all swirled inside her, a storm she wasn't sure she could weather. Ethan's eyes met hers for the first time. "Mom, I'm fine," she said, cutting him off. Her voice came out cold, even to her own ears. "I don't need you to fix this." His expression softened, but there was a hesitation in his eyes, like he was unsure of whether to approach her or retreat further into his own guilt. Vivian stood still for a moment, fighting the tears that had begun to gather behind her eyes. Maya had built a life without her, a life where she was clearly no longer welcome. And Ethan was caught in the middle, torn between his loyalty to his sister and the reality of what their family had become. "I'll see you there," she typed, her fingers moving faster than she could think. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. There was a stillness in her that followed, a strange calm that she hadn't expected. It was as if she had already made a decision, a choice that didn't need to be explained. For once, the weight of her own silence felt empowering. She could feel the tension in the room shift, as if Ethan were waiting for her to explain, to tell him what she meant. But she didn't have the words for him, not now, not when she wasn't even sure of them herself. The phone buzzed again. A new message from Grace. "It's time to expose the truth." Vivian's heart pounded harder now. She had always played by the rules, been the quiet observer, the one who bore the weight of everything without complaint. But that had never been enough. She was done being invisible. She sent a quick reply to Grace. It started. Then she glanced at Ethan, who was still staring at her, a mix of concern and confusion on his face. But this time, she didn't look away. She held his gaze, unblinking. "I'll be there tomorrow, Ethan." At the reception, she said, her voice steady. "The decision made." Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. His eyes dropped to the floor as he seemed to lose whatever argument he was about to make. Vivian didn't blame him. This was beyond him, beyond any of them. Tomorrow she would show up, not to apologize, not to beg for anything, but to remind Maya and the rest of the family that she was still here, still worthy of being seen. Vivian turned and walked out of the kitchen, her mind already on the next step. The storm was coming, and she would be ready for it. Vivian stood before the mirror, adjusting the simple, yet elegant, black dress she'd bought that morning. It wasn't flashy or showy, just soft, with a subtle sheen that caught the light in a way that felt like it might say something important, without actually saying anything at all. She hadn't even considered the option of something more extravagant. This wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about making a statement in the most understated way possible. She ran her fingers through her hair, not bothering with a perfect style. She didn't need to look flawless. She needed to be present, to walk into that reception with the quiet confidence she had spent so many years suppressing. The wedding had already begun, but she wasn't in a hurry. Vivian had never been one for grand entrances, for causing a stir, but today was different. Today she wasn't going to hide in the shadows, playing the part of the invisible woman she had become in this family. She was going to make them see her. She took a deep breath, grabbed her purse, and walked out the door. The car ride felt surreal. The familiar streets outside her window looked different somehow, distant, as if she were driving through someone else's life. When she arrived at the venue, the parking lot was full, the hum of conversations rising from inside the grand building. Music played softly from within, and she could hear the faint clink of glasses. Vivian stood at the entrance for a long moment, watching guests bustle past, laughing and chatting, some greeting one another with warm familiarity. Her pulse quickened. A sense of calm settled over her though. No more nerves, no more second-guessing herself. She stepped inside. It was everything she had imagined, sparkling chandeliers overhead, long tables draped with white linens, and guests laughing in clusters. The buzz of voices was overwhelming, yet strangely hollow. She looked around for Maya, but she was nowhere to be found. Instead, Ethan caught her eye from across the room. He was standing near the bar, his face a mask of tension. He looked at her, then quickly looked away, as if he'd been caught doing something he shouldn't. Vivian's stomach twisted, but it wasn't a surprise. Nothing was anymore. Maya had clearly done everything to erase her from this moment, and Ethan was now just an extension of that erasure. She wasn't even sure if he'd spoken to Maya about her coming. She moved toward the buffet, her heels tapping sharply against the polished floor. As she walked, the low murmurs of the guests grew louder, more piercing. She overheard a whispered conversation between two women standing nearby. "Who is that woman?" one of them asked. "Is she family?" Vivian froze, just long enough for the sting to hit her. It wasn't the first time, it wouldn't be the last, but she didn't let it show on her face. Instead, she smiled, a quiet knowing smile, and continued her walk through the room, pretending she didn't hear them. She reached the corner of the room where Lucas was standing, looking awkward in his tuxedo. He wasn't involved in the drama, at least not yet. "Lucas," she said, her voice calm and measured. "I'm not here to cause trouble, but you'll want to know what's coming." He looked at her, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. His lips pressed into a tight line before he nodded slightly. "I'll keep an eye out." She wasn't sure what that meant, but she could sense his nervousness. Lucas wasn't a man who worried about much, except when it came to Maya. His loyalty was unquestionable, but today it seemed like even he couldn't ignore the cracks forming in their carefully constructed family facade. Vivian turned her back to him, surveying the room. She noticed how people subtly avoided looking her way, how Maya's friends exchanged glances when she passed by. She could feel the judgment. It was palpable, hanging in the air, suffocating her. And then she saw Maya. She was standing near the center of the room, laughing with a group of people completely unaware or pretending to be of Vivian's presence. She was glowing in her wedding dress, the spotlight wrapped tightly around her like a security blanket. Maya had found her place, had built her life, and had forgotten who had helped her get there. Vivian's throat tightened. She could feel the years of silence, the years of holding back her voice, weighing on her chest, for all the sacrifices she had made, for all the love she had poured into this family. It was clear that none of it mattered now. And yet, as she stood there, facing the woman who had once been her little girl, Vivian felt something rise within her. She didn't need to be acknowledged. She didn't need Maya's approval. For the first time in a long time, she realized that she could survive without it. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She fished it out, glancing at the screen. It was a message from Grace. Do what you need to do. Don't let them erase you again. Vivian closed her eyes for a moment, letting the words sink in. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't going anywhere. When she opened her eyes, she saw Ethan again. This time he didn't look away. His gaze met hers, and for a fleeting second, it felt like he was about to approach her. But before he could move, Maya appeared at his side, her presence like a shadow falling over him. Vivian's heart clenched. She had always hoped there was some room for her in Ethan's life, some space where she wouldn't be pushed aside for Maya's sake. But now, standing across the room, she realized there was nothing left for her here. She turned her attention back to the reception, to the sea of faces that were watching her, judging her and pretending to care. She wasn't going to let them decide her worth anymore. She wasn't going to shrink back. Vivian took a deep breath and steeled herself for whatever came next. This battle wasn't over, and it had only just begun. As she glanced toward the exit, the buzz of the crowd seemed to fade into the background, and she felt a strange calm wash over her. Tomorrow, everything would change. Vivian stood in the corner of the reception hall, watching as Maya floated through the crowd. The soft glow of chandeliers bathed her daughter in a halo of light, making her look almost untouchable. Maya was the picture of bride perfection, radiant, laughing, and completely unaware of the eyes that followed her. It was the kind of scene Vivian had imagined when Maya was a little girl, the fairy tale moment she'd always hoped would come to pass. But it felt like the fairy tale was being told without her in it, and somehow that sting was deeper than anything she could have prepared for. Vivian's gaze didn't waver. She had been here for hours, standing off to the side, invisible. Even her own son didn't seem to notice her, as he mingled in the crowd, his eyes carefully avoiding hers whenever their paths crossed. Ethan wasn't even trying to hide the distance between them anymore. There was nothing but silence in his face, a silence that spoke volumes. Maya continued to smile and twirl, the center of the universe, while Vivian remained a shadow. Her mind wandered back through the years, to when she was the one who held Maya's hand, who fought for her future, who made every sacrifice without hesitation. All those nights of staying up late to help with homework, all the driving to soccer practices, all the advice and love given, and now here she was, an afterthought. Vivian's stomach twisted. This wasn't the daughter she had raised. Somewhere along the way, Maya had changed. The woman standing in front of her was someone who didn't even acknowledge her mother's presence. As Vivian scanned the room, she noticed a few of the guests sneaking glances at her. Whispers filled the air around her, light but sharp. Who invited her? One woman muttered as she sipped her wine. Is she even part of the family? Another voice asked, and Vivian instinctively lowered her head, pretending not to hear. Her heart clenched at each whisper. Every word was another thread in the web of invisibility Maya had created for her. But this time, Vivian didn't flinch. She stood still, letting the words bounce off her, knowing deep down that there was no point in trying to explain herself to people who never bothered to understand. They had their roles in the story, just as she had hers. She was the outsider now, the forgotten one. She looked at Ethan again. He was at the bar, speaking quietly with Lucas. Ethan laughed at something Lucas said, his shoulders slightly hunched in that familiar way, as if carrying the weight of things unsaid. Lucas, for his part, was stiff, his attention half on Ethan, half on Vivian. They both knew what was happening, but neither one had the courage to act. Vivian thought about all the years spent pouring herself into this family. She had done everything to give Maya a better life, but now, standing at the edge of the crowd, it felt like she had done it all for nothing. Maya had moved on, and in the process, she had stripped Vivian from her life, erased her like a character no one cared about anymore. Her chest tightened as the realization hit her. She wasn't just excluded, she was actively pushed out. She was slipping away from Maya's world completely, and it was happening without so much as a second thought. She reached into her purse for her phone. The screen lit up with a message from Grace. "They're all just playing a role. I'm the invisible woman." Vivian quickly typed back, "I'm losing her, Grace. I can feel it. I'm not even a part of this anymore." The seconds ticked by, the noise of the room fading into a distant hum as she waited for Grace's response. Vivian stared at the phone, trying to steady her breath. The wedding, the reception, none of it felt real anymore. Everything had become a performance. The phone buzzed with Grace's reply, "It's time to expose the truth." Vivian felt a rush of heat in her chest. Expose the truth. The words were simple, but they struck her like a revelation. What had she been hiding from all these years? What had they all been hiding from her? She felt the weight of Grace's words settle in her stomach. It was time to stop playing by their rules. It was time to stop hiding in the shadows. Vivian glanced at Maya again, still laughing with her friends, the world spinning around her. But Maya's laughter had become hollow to Vivian. She was no longer part of the circle, no longer a player in this carefully constructed fantasy, and the more she watched, the clearer it became that the truth had always been there right in front of her. She wasn't just a mother who had been ignored. She was a woman who had been systematically erased. Every choice Maya had made since she'd gotten engaged had been a silent push to remove Vivian from the picture entirely. The wedding was just the latest act in a long-running performance of exclusion. Vivian closed her eyes for a moment, letting Grace's words echo in her mind, "Expose the truth." For a long time she had been a spectator, watching her own life slip away in pieces. But not anymore. She wasn't just an invisible woman, she was a woman who had been silenced, and that silence was finally breaking. Her phone buzzed again, a reminder of the message she had just sent. Vivian slipped the phone back into her purse and turned her gaze toward the exit. She had made up her mind. There was no going back now. As the reception continued without her, the truth began to unravel, piece by piece. It was only a matter of time before Maya's world, her perfectly constructed fragile world, fell apart. And when it did, Vivian would be there to make sure the pieces were put back together the right way. Vivian's heart raced as she stepped into the quiet alcove near the back of the venue, hoping for a brief moment of peace. She leaned against the wall, taking in a slow breath, but before she could collect her thoughts, the sound of clicking heels drew her attention. Maya's silhouette appeared in the dim light, her face tight with barely concealed fury. She approached with the deliberate pace of someone who had already made up their mind about something. The air between them thickened, charged with something Vivian couldn't yet name. "What are you doing here?" Maya's voice was sharp, like a knife cutting through the stillness. She barely glanced at Vivian, her eyes focused on the space beyond her mother's face, as if she couldn't even bear to look at her. "Didn't I make it clear?" The words stung, but Vivian didn't let it She had been prepared for this confrontation, but the rawness of it still hit her in waves. She stood tall, her voice steady, though her insides felt like they were unraveling. "No, Maya, you didn't make anything clear." Vivian's gaze locked with her daughter's. Not a flicker of hesitation in her stance. "I'm your mother, and I have a right to be here." For a second, there was silence, but it wasn't peaceful. Maya's jaw clenched, and her eyes flickered with something dangerous. Anger, perhaps, or shame. It didn't matter. Maya wasn't going to let this go quietly. "You've been nothing but an embarrassment." Maya spat the words out, her voice low but venomous. "Always making everything about yourself. Always drawing attention to your hurt feelings. It's pathetic." Vivian felt the words like a slap, but she refused to react. She had heard enough in her lifetime to know when to stay calm. She exhaled slowly, her eyes never leaving Maya's, her body radiating an unshakable stillness. "I've been quiet long enough," Vivian said, her voice even but with an edge of years of silence behind it. "You can't just erase me. Not anymore," the words landed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Vivian saw a flicker of doubt cross Maya's face. Just for a second, but it was enough. Enough for Vivian to know that this fight wasn't just about tonight. It was about everything that had been slowly breaking apart for years. Maya's expression twisted, a flash of something that could have been regret or something darker. But then, just as quickly, it hardened again. She turned away, her heels clicking angrily against the floor as she stormed off, her dress trailing behind her like the remnants of a dream that Vivian was no longer a part of. Lucas, who had been standing at a distance, watching the confrontation unfold, met Vivian's eyes for the briefest of moments. His face was unreadable, but there was a nervousness there, a subtle shift in his posture that made Vivian pause. He didn't say a word, but his gaze lingered for a heartbeat longer than it should have, as if he knew something she didn't. Vivian's breath caught. This wasn't just about Maya anymore. This was about everything. The years of manipulation, the slow unraveling of her place in this family, the pieces of the puzzle that had never quite fit together, were starting to make sense, but there was no turning back now. The moment felt pivotal. She could feel the weight of it hanging in the air, thick with unspoken words, with the ripples of a storm that was just beginning to build. Vivian reached into her pocket, her fingers trembling only slightly as she pulled out her phone. It was almost instinctive now, the way she unlocked it and opened the recording app without thinking. She had learned to protect herself in silence, to keep the evidence, to guard her truth for the moment when the world would finally listen. She pressed record. The sound of Maya's retreating footsteps was faint in the background, but it was the crackle of the tension still hanging in the air that felt louder than anything. Vivian knew what she had to do. This conversation, this confrontation, it would be shared. She would not let Maya control the narrative anymore. She wouldn't let herself be erased without a trace. As the phone recorded, Vivian didn't flinch. She didn't move. Her chest rose and fell, but the calmness was an armor she had built over years of being unseen, unheard. Maya might have stormed off, but the truth was now in her hands. Vivian knew that when the time came, she could expose everything. The phone buzzed as a new message notification appeared on the screen. It was from Grace. "Are you okay?" Vivian took a deep breath, her fingers moving quickly to reply, "I'm done being invisible. It's time to expose everything." She hit send, then stared at the screen for a moment, feeling the weight of the decision. It felt final, like a door closing behind her. There would be no more silences, no more shadows. It was time to bring everything to light. Vivian took one last look around the room. The laughter, the music, the clinking of glasses, it all felt so distant now, like she was watching someone else's life. And in a way, maybe she... As the recording continued, Vivian felt the storm gathering within her. It wasn't just Maya's world she was about to disrupt, it was everything, and when it hit, there would be no turning back. She pressed send on the message to Grace, and then with steady hands, uploaded the recording to the family thread. She waited, heart pounding, as the file uploaded, knowing full well that the storm was about to break. Now the waiting began. Vivian's phone buzzed incessantly, the screen flashing with notifications, each one more urgent than the last. She stared at it, her finger hovering over the screen, feeling a strange mix of anticipation and dread. The recording had only been sent minutes ago, but already the ripple effect was overwhelming. One message came from Grace. "Are you okay? I knew it was coming, but this is..." Vivian didn't respond right away, letting the words linger, feeling the weight of Grace's support settle into her bones. Then came the family. "What's going on? Is this really happening?" Her sister's message blinked onto the screen, followed by another from her cousin. "Vivian, we need to talk. What's this about?" The flood of messages kept coming, each one more shocked, more confused, more invested. Her family had always known something was wrong, but now they were seeing it with their own eyes. Maya's actions, her disregard, her silence, they could no longer be ignored. Vivian felt herself grow detached as the messages poured in, almost as if she were observing herself from a distance. She didn't need to explain. The truth was already out there, in the open for them to process. She glanced at Ethan's message. It was short, neutral. "Are you okay? I don't know what to think right now." Her son, the one who had always been her quiet ally, but who had withdrawn the moment Maya's influence had grown too strong. He had always been torn between them, between the woman who had raised him and the sister who had become a force in her own right. Vivian felt a pang of sorrow, but she refused to let it drown her. This wasn't about Ethan anymore. This wasn't about trying to fix a broken family. This was about her own truth. She typed back, "I'm fine, but don't pretend like you didn't know." Before she could put the phone down, a final message from Lucas appeared. "Maya is furious. She's escalating this." Vivian's heart skipped a beat, the words pulling her back to the present, back to the swirling storm of emotions that threatened to consume everything. Maya was angry. No surprise there. But escalation? What did that mean? Vivian's fingers tightened around the phone, the weight of her decision pressing down harder. She had broken the silence, but now it seemed the real battle was only just beginning. She put the phone down, rubbing her face as if trying to wipe away the years of suppression, of quiet pain that had built to this very moment. "She's escalating this." The words replayed in her mind. Vivian knew what they meant. Maya wasn't going to let this go quietly. She had always been the one to control the narrative, to twist everything into something that fit her image. But now the truth had been set loose, and Maya was no longer in control. A small, bitter smile tugged at Vivian's lips. She had been invisible for so long. She had spent years being erased, dismissed, ignored. Every gesture she made, every decision she fought for, had been rendered meaningless in Maya's eyes. But that was over. The truth was out. The silent, suffocating grip Maya had held over her was finally loosening. Grace's message buzzed again. "You've been invisible for so long, it's time to be seen." Vivian read the words, her chest tight, her breath shallow. It was true. She had lived for too long in the shadows, always putting others first, always sacrificing herself for a family that had taken her presence for granted. But no more. The silence she had once lived with had festered into something much larger. Now the truth was like a fire, burning away the lies, the manipulations, the distortions. She would be seen, whether they liked it or not. She glanced at the messages again, her eyes falling on one from her cousin. "This is heartbreaking. I didn't know how bad it was. We need to talk." And there it was again. The shock, the disbelief. Maya had been good at hiding the truth, at keeping everyone in their carefully curated roles. But now the walls were crumbling, and the truth was spilling out in all its ugly, beautiful clarity. The room around her seemed to grow quiet. The conversations, the laughter, the clinking glasses, all of it felt distant now, as if she were in a different world. Maya had created that world. She had built it on the foundation of silence, of control. But it wasn't just Maya's world anymore. Vivian's phone buzzed again, and this time it wasn't from family. It was a notification from the video file she had uploaded. "Your video has been shared 18 times. The number blinked back at her, cold and factual, and a sense of finality settled into her bones. The truth was no longer hers alone. It belonged to everyone now, and there was no taking it back. As she sat back in the chair, the weight of everything pressing down on her, Vivian realized she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the years of silence, for the years of erasure. She was fighting for the right to stand, to speak, to be seen. And as the phone buzzed one final time, another message from Lucas. Vivian felt the storm on the horizon grow stronger, the wind picking up, the sky darkening. She wasn't sure how this would all play out, but one thing was certain: the truth had been set free, and there was no telling what would happen next. "Maya's furious. She's coming for you." Vivian stood up, her fingers tightening around the phone. The storm had just begun. The next morning, Vivian's phone buzzed relentlessly, each notification a spark in the growing fire. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the screen, her hands trembling slightly, as the images, the words, the opinions flooded her world. Maya had retaliated. A social media post, bright and loud, declared, "A family member tried to sabotage my special day, trying to draw attention to her own issues. Not everything is about you." The comments beneath it ranged from sympathy to confusion, to outright criticism of Vivian. The post, vague as it was, still did its job. It painted her as the villain, as the troublemaker, the one who had broken the rules. The world was already casting their judgment, and Maya's carefully crafted narrative was in full force. Vivian set the phone down, a hollow feeling spreading through her chest. She had expected this, but the sting still burned. The truth she had fought to reveal now felt like a sharp edge turned against her. She wasn't just fighting for her voice anymore. She was fighting to keep herself from being silenced altogether. And yet, there was something else, a strange relief. She wasn't hiding, she wasn't disappearing. She had stepped into the light, and though the consequences were severe, she couldn't help but feel a weight lifting off her shoulders. The doorbell rang. Vivian's heart skipped. She knew who it was. Ethan walked in, his face tight, his eyes clouded with tension. He didn't sit down, didn't greet her like he usually would. He was standing, hands shoved into his pockets, his posture rigid. "You've taken this too far," he said, his voice low but urgent. "This is going to tear the family apart. Do you even realize that?" Vivian met his gaze, her chest tightening. She had hoped he would understand. She had hoped he would stand by her, but she could see it in his eyes now. He was torn between his loyalty to Maya and the reality of what he knew was wrong. The silence between them felt like a chasm, and she wasn't sure if either of them could cross it anymore. "This," she said slowly, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside her, "has been tearing us apart for years. I didn't do this. Maya." Ethan's mouth tightened into a line. He opened his mouth to argue, but then closed it, as if the words had gotten stuck somewhere between guilt and helplessness. He looked away, his gaze shifting to the floor, the weight of their shared history settling between them. "I didn't want this, but you don't get to erase me anymore, Ethan." Her voice softened, almost pleading. "I'm tired of being invisible, of being your second choice." He winced, the words clearly striking a nerve, but then he was quiet. His eyes were too tired to hold the fight any longer. After a long moment, he sighed. "I don't know what to do with this, Mom. I don't know who's right anymore." Vivian's heart broke at the admission, but she knew deep down it was something she couldn't fix for him. He had to find his own way, through the wreckage. She could only stand firm in her truth. Grace's message buzzed on her phone, offering a brief respite from the tension in the room. "Stay strong, don't apologize. This is your truth, and it's time they hear it." Vivian smiled faintly at the words, the strength in Grace's message, grounding her in a way that nothing else could. She wasn't alone in this. She had people who understood, but as she read it, another message appeared. This time from Maya. "You need to apologize. Now, publicly, or I'll cut you out of my life for good." Vivian's breath caught. The ultimatum, the very thing she had expected, the final card Maya would play to reclaim control. She read the message over and over, feeling a mixture of anger and defiance flood her veins. Maya was trying to force her back into submission, to make her apologize for standing up for herself, for demanding to be seen. Vivian could feel the weight of the threat, the gravity of the choice she had to make. Apologize. Be quiet again. Fade into the background. Or stand her ground and risk losing everything. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She could send a simple apology, admit that she had overstepped, smooth things over. It would be the easy way out. It would allow her to crawl back into the space she had occupied for so long. The space of being the unseen, the unheard. But the truth was already out there. Maya's world had already begun to crack, and Vivian had no intention of gluing it back together with lies and silence. She typed, her fingers steady. "I won't apologize, not this time." She pressed send, her heart thudding in her chest. It felt final, it felt right, and it felt terrifying. As she stared at the screen, her phone buzzed again. "You'll regret this," Maya's message read. "You'll lose me for good." Vivian let out a slow breath, her fingers tightening around the phone. The storm was far from over. But for the first time in years, she felt ready to face it head-on. Whatever came next, she would no longer shrink, and this time she wouldn't apologize for standing tall. Vivian sat in the car, her fingers resting lightly on her lap, the weight of her decision pressing down on her chest. The invitation to the family meeting had been clear. Maya wanted to talk, and the last time Maya wanted to talk, it was a prelude to more manipulation, more attempts to silence her. But Vivian wasn't going to shrink back this time. Not again. The drive to Maya's house felt longer than it should. Each mile seemed to stretch, the anticipation thick in the air, heavy with the knowledge of what was waiting for her. Maya, Ethan, the family. The clash that had been building for years was about to reach its boiling point, and Vivian was ready. When she arrived, the tension was already palpable, the heavy air greeting her as she stepped into the house. Maya stood at the door, her arms crossed, her expression cold and composed. Behind her the others lingered, their faces carefully neutral. Ethan stood near the kitchen, his posture stiff, like he wasn't quite sure where to place himself. "You came," Maya said, her voice flat, almost disappointed. "I didn't think you'd actually show." Vivian didn't respond immediately. She wasn't here for small talk. She wasn't here to appease anyone. This was about one thing only: standing her ground. The room was quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant murmur of traffic outside. Maya motioned for Vivian to sit, but Vivian remained standing, her posture unwavering. "I'm not apologizing," Vivian said, her voice clear and firm. "Not for standing up for myself. I didn't come here to beg for forgiveness. Maya, I came here to make it clear that you can't control me anymore." Maya's eyes flickered with something. The anger was bubbling under the surface, and it was only a matter of time before it erupted. She stepped closer to Vivian, her voice low but laced with venom. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone. You ruined my wedding reception, and now you think it's okay to show up here and act like nothing happened. I didn't ruin anything." Vivian shot back. "You've been ruining this family for years, Maya. You've been erasing me, ignoring me, and now you want me to apologize for existing, for standing in the same room as you." Her voice was steady, but the words were heavier than she'd expected. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between them. He opened his mouth to speak but quickly shut it, unsure of where to start. His presence was more of a burden now, a silent reminder of how torn he was between the two women who had shaped his life. "Mom," Ethan began, his voice hesitant, but Vivian interrupted him, her gaze fixed firmly on Maya. "I didn't ask for an apology," Vivian said, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. "I asked for respect, something you've never given me. You've treated me like I was invisible. You've made it clear that I didn't matter, but that ends now." Maya's face twisted, a mixture of frustration and disbelief. "You're making this all about you," she sneered. "You always do this. Why can't you just let it go? Why can't you just be happy for me? Why do you have to make everything harder than it needs to be?" Vivian took a deep breath, pushing the anger down long enough to respond calmly. "Because you've never let me be happy, Maya. You've never let anyone be happy, unless it fit into your perfect little world. You've made sure that every moment has been about you." Her words hung in the air between them, raw and unfiltered. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Maya's face flushed with rage, but instead of saying anything, she turned to the others in the room, as if looking for validation, for support. But none of them spoke. The room was divided, each person retreating into their own corner, unsure of what to say, unsure of what side to take. "Maya, you need to see this," Vivian said, her voice softer now, but no less resolute. She pulled out her phone and opened the recording, letting it play through the speakers, the sounds of their confrontation from the reception filling the room. It was her own voice, steady and calm, saying words that had been buried for years. Maya's anger, her accusations, her attempts to shut her down, they were all there, captured in real time. There was nowhere for Maya to hide now, no more denial, no more twisting the truth. Vivian looked at Maya, her eyes cold, but with a sense of finality. You can't erase this anymore, the truth is out there. And there's nothing you can do to take it back. Maya's face contorted with fury, her hands trembling at her sides. You'll regret this, she spat, her voice seething with anger. You'll regret everything you've done. You have no idea what you've unleashed. Just wait. Vivian met her gaze, unflinching. I've waited long enough. I'm not scared of you anymore, Maya. For a moment, Maya just stood there, seething, as if she couldn't quite process what had just happened. Then, with a final searing look, she turned away and stormed out of the room, the door slamming behind her. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan didn't move, but his eyes met Vivian's, his face a mix of sadness and something else, regret, maybe, or resignation. He didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. Vivian exhaled slowly, the weight of everything pressing down on her. She had stood her ground. She had said the words that needed to be said, but the battle wasn't over. This was only the beginning. As the tension in the room hung thick, Vivian felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. The storm was far from over, but for the first time in years, she felt like she was ready for whatever came next. She wasn't going to shrink back, not anymore. The silence in the room lingered, heavy with the unspoken. Maya had stormed out, slamming the door behind her. But Vivian didn't move. The weight of the confrontation still pressed down on her chest. She had stood her ground. She had said the words she had needed to say. But she knew this was far from over. Maya's fury would reach her again. She just didn't know when or how. Ethan didn't speak immediately. He stayed where he was, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, eyes cast down. It was as if the air had thickened around him, like he was suffocating under the pressure. Vivian could feel the tension radiating from him, but it didn't faze her. She wasn't here to fix his confusion, his indecision, not anymore. The door opened, and Maya reappeared, her expression darker, something else, something more dangerous in her eyes. She didn't say a word at first, only walked toward Vivian slowly, the air between them, charged with something unfamiliar. The sudden shift in Maya's demeanor made Vivian's pulse quicken. You really think you've won? Maya's voice was almost a whisper, but it cut through the room like a blade. Vivian didn't flinch. I'm not trying to win, Maya. I'm trying to be seen. For one. Maya took a step closer, her eyes narrowing. You've always been the outsider, in this family, she said, her words so cold they felt like they could freeze the air between them. Vivian's breath caught. It wasn't a surprise, but hearing it out loud felt like a punch to the gut. The outsider. She had always known it, but hearing Maya say it like that, so matter-of-factly, sent a cold ripple through her. She hadn't imagined it, hadn't exaggerated. This had always been Maya's world, and Vivian had been nothing more than a footnote in. Maya's words hung in the air like smoke, choking out any remaining clarity. You think I've had all this power for nothing. I've worked for it. I've built my life. And you, Maya, gestured at Vivian, her hand shaking with barely restrained fury. You've always been the one who didn't fit in. You've never belonged here, and you never will. Vivian stood still, her mind racing, but her expression calm. The outside. The words kept repeating in her head. She could feel the pieces clicking together, the puzzle she had been trying to solve for years now, suddenly coming into sharp focus. Maya had always needed to be in control, always needed to be the center of the family, and Vivian had been nothing more than a casualty in that need. Maya, Vivian said quietly, her voice soft but unwavering. Why didn't you tell me this before? Why keep it hidden? Maya stiffened, her jaw tightening as she looked at Vivian, caught off guard by the question. For a split second, she didn't answer, and Vivian could see the battle waging inside her daughter's eyes. She was trying to keep control, trying to maintain the narrative she had built over the years, but the cracks were showing. Why? Vivian pressed again, her voice gaining strength. Why did you let me stay here, pretending that we were a family, when all along you saw me as nothing more than a burden? Why didn't you just tell me the truth? Maya's face twisted in frustration. She opened her mouth to speak but faltered. The words didn't come easily. Vivian could see her daughter's anger crumbling, breaking apart beneath the weight of the truth. But Maya's silence spoke louder than anything. It was a silence that had been years in the making, years of jealousy, of resentment, of control, and now it was unraveling before them both. Ethan remained quiet, still standing near the kitchen, but his discomfort was palpable. He shifted from foot to foot, his hands in his pockets, his eyes darting between his mother and his sister. He wanted to speak, but there were no words left. Vivian let the silence linger, holding her ground. She didn't need Maya to speak anymore. The truth was already out. Maya's manipulation, her control had been exposed. "I'm done," Vivian said, her voice steady. "I've been the scapegoat for too long, and I won't be your victim anymore." For a long moment, Maya just stood there, staring at Vivian with a mixture of disbelief and something darker, something she couldn't quite hide. It was clear now. Maya had always seen Vivian as a threat, as a shadow to be erased, and now she was losing control. She had underestimated her mother. She had underestimated how much Vivian could endure. Maya finally turned away, and Vivian watched her closely, knowing this battle was far from over, but not caring. For the first time, Vivian felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had faced the truth, and it was liberating. But just as Vivian thought the tension might begin to subside, Maya turned back to face her, her eyes filled with an anger Vivian had never seen before. She pulled something from her bag and slapped it down onto the table. "This is what you don't know," Maya said, her voice trembling with fury. "This is how it's always been. You've never understood." Vivian stared at the document, her heart pounding. It was a will. Maya's will. And something about this revelation was darker than she could have imagined. Before Vivian could say anything, Maya turned and stormed out of the room, leaving the document on the table between them like a final damning declaration. Vivian's hand hovered over the paper, the weight of it pulling her in. Whatever this was, it was far bigger than she had anticipated. The storm was far from over, and this time, there was no going back. Vivian stared at the will in front of her, the paper so crisp it almost felt like a weapon in her hands. She hadn't asked for this, hadn't expected it, but here it was, the final piece of the puzzle. Maya had placed it on the table like it was nothing, as if it were just another item to discard, another part of the plan to secure her hold on everything. But Vivian wasn't going to let it slide, not anymore. Her eyes skimmed the text, her pulse quickening with each line she read. The words burned into her memory. "Vivian's name is to be excluded from the inheritance." The sentence was simple, but its weight was suffocating. The family's wealth, their home, their legacy was being handed to Maya, and Vivian wasn't even worthy of being considered. She looked up at Maya, who was standing there with a sickening sense of satisfaction on her face. There was no guilt, no remorse in her expression. She was certain of her victory. "It's mine," Maya said with a casual smugness, leaning against the doorframe, as though this was all part of the plan. "I've earned it. You should have known better than to think you had any claim." Vivian didn't react immediately. She sat back, holding the paper in her hands, trying to steady her breath. This wasn't about the money. She didn't care about what was on the page. It was about the control, the final attempt to erase her from the family's story. Maya had always needed to be in control, to have everything revolve around her. This was just the last move in her game. "So this is how it's always been?" Vivian asked, her voice cool, betraying none of the hurt she felt. "This was your plan all along?" Maya smirked, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "I did what I had to do. I'm the one who's always been there. You've been nothing but an inconvenience." Vivian set the will down carefully, her hands steady now, her resolve hardening. She had lived her life tiptoeing around Maya's demands, her manipulations, and now it was clear just how deep the control went. But Vivian was done. She wasn't playing this game anymore. "Did you really think I'd let this stand?" Vivian's voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. She leaned forward, locking eyes with Maya, You've manipulated everything. Your whole life is built on lies, and now you think you can erase me too. Maya's smugness faltered, just for a second, but Vivian didn't miss. I don't care what's on this paper. Vivian continued, her voice calm but steady, because it doesn't matter. I'm taking this to court. The words hung in the air. Maya recoiled slightly, her eyes flashing with panic, but she quickly regained her composure. You're threatening me now? What are you going to do? Sue me? She laughed, a hollow sound. You can't prove anything. This will is legally binding. Vivian didn't flinch. She had been quiet for too long. But no more. You might want to reconsider, Maya, she said, her tone low and serious. You didn't just exclude me. You forged this document. I've already consulted a lawyer. Maya's face paled for the briefest moment, the smugness completely gone now. She took a step back, her fingers nervously clutching the edges of the chair, as if she could somehow regain control. Ethan, who had been silent the entire time, finally spoke, his voice strained with guilt. Mom, I didn't know about this, he said, his words tumbling out. I didn't know Maya had done this. I never agreed with it. His eyes searched Vivian's face, but there was no understanding in them, only a deep sense of regret. I don't know what to say. Vivian met his gaze, the weight of the years pressing down on her shoulders. There's nothing to say, Ethan, she replied, her voice steady but full of sadness. You've been caught between us for too long, but now you have a choice to make. This isn't just about me anymore. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He didn't know where to stand, who to side with. He had never had to choose before, had never fully understood how deep the rift between his mother and sister ran, but now he saw it in its entirety. Vivian didn't give him a chance to speak. She was done waiting, done second-guessing. I'll make sure everyone knows the truth. I'll fight for what's mine, my dignity, my place in this family, and whatever's left of it. Maya opened her mouth, her words coming out in a rush, but Vivian interrupted her before she could say anything. You don't get to control this narrative anymore, Maya. You've done enough damage. Maya's face twisted with fury, but the fear in her eyes was unmistakable now. Vivian had hit a nerve. Maya was losing control, and it terrified her. You'll regret this. Maya spat, the venom in her words clear, her voice trembling with rage. You'll regret challenging me. You'll lose everything. You have no idea what's coming next. Vivian stood, her back straight, facing the woman who had tried to control her for years. She didn't react to Maya's threats, didn't flinch. Instead, she simply said, I'm done letting you decide my future. With a final glare, Maya stormed out of the room, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. The silence that followed felt different this time, no longer suffocating, but liberating. Vivian's heart pounded, but for the first time, she felt like she had finally taken control of her own fate. The battle wasn't over. It had only just begun, and as she turned toward the table, the will now a symbol of everything that had been done to her, Vivian knew there would be no turning back. She had already set the wheels in motion. The storm was coming, and this time she was ready. Vivian sat at the kitchen table, the legal documents spread out before her like a battleground. She had spent hours gathering everything she could, her own legal papers, bank statements, old correspondence, witness accounts, and now it all sat in front of her, the pieces of a war she had never wanted to fight. But here she was, ready to take the first step. She wasn't fighting for money, for possessions, or for a piece of the inheritance. She was fighting for something far more precious, her voice. Her fingers trembled slightly as she picked up the pen to sign the formal complaint, challenging the will's legitimacy. The words were clear. There was no room for ambiguity. Maya had forged the will, excluded her, manipulated the documents. It wasn't just about the material things that had been stolen from her. It was about control. Maya had wanted to control everything, from the family to the narrative, and Vivian had finally reached the point where she refused to be erased. A knock on the door broke her concentration, and Vivian glanced up, her heart skipping. Ethan stepped inside, his face drawn, his eyes tired. He didn't speak at first, but the weight of his silence said more than words ever could. He wasn't here to defend Maya anymore. He wasn't sure where he stood, but he wasn't here to challenge his mother. "How's it going?" he asked quietly, his voice subdued. There was no anger, no blame, just a sadness that had settled in him like a thick fog. Vivian met his gaze, her fingers still on the legal papers. "It's happening, Ethan. I'm going through with it." He nodded slowly, but the discomfort in his eyes didn't disappear. "You know Maya's not going to let this go. She's going to fight back, and she'll go to any lengths to win. I'm not scared of her anymore," Vivian replied firmly, though the knot in her stomach tightened. "This isn't about money. It's about standing up for myself. It's about saying I'm not the outsider anymore." Ethan sat down across from her, his eyes fixed on the papers in front of them. "I don't know what to say," he muttered, shaking his head. "This has been building for so long, and I didn't see it. I didn't want to see it." Vivian let out a long breath, trying to calm the storm inside her. "You don't have to say anything. I just need you to understand that I'm doing this for me, for the person I've had to bury for too long." Ethan hesitated, his eyes flickering toward the papers again. He opened his mouth, then closed it. "I never agreed with the way Maya treated you, but you have to know. I can't fight her. Not like this. Not against all of her lies. I just can't." Vivian looked at him with a mixture of pain and understanding. He wasn't ready to take sides, he was stuck in the middle. But that was okay. She wasn't doing this for him. She was doing it for herself. The phone buzzed in her pocket, and Vivian quickly pulled it out, seeing a message from Grace. "You've got this. I've talked to the lawyer. Stay strong. It's not about the money. It's about your right to be heard." Vivian smiled softly at the message. Grace had been a rock through this entire process, providing the legal advice and emotional support she needed to keep moving forward. She had been there for Vivian when no one else had been, and it meant more than she could put into words. "I'm not backing down, Ethan," Vivian said, her voice steady as she looked at him. "I've lived in the shadows for too long. It's time they see me. It's time to make them see me." He didn't respond immediately, but after a long pause, he nodded. There was a look in his eyes, a flicker of something, maybe understanding, maybe regret, but it wasn't enough to change anything. Maya had won him over for so long, and Vivian knew that wasn't going to change overnight. She picked up the phone again, her hands steady, and hit send on the complaint. There was no turning back now. She had taken the first step. Maya would be furious, but Vivian didn't care. She wasn't going to let her daughter's manipulations hold power over her any longer. Ethan stood up slowly, walking toward the door. He paused, his hand on the doorknob, and glanced back at her. "I still don't know how this will play out, Mom. But, I hope you know what you're doing." Vivian didn't flinch. She'd come too far. "I'm doing what's right for me, Ethan. I'm doing what should have been done a long time ago." As Ethan left, Vivian sat alone in the room, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. The battle was just beginning, but for the first time in years, she felt like she was fighting for something. Her phone buzzed again, and her heart skipped as she saw the new message notification. It was from the lawyer. "We've filed the complaint. The court date is set for next week." Vivian let out a shaky breath. The storm was here, and there was no turning back. The days that followed were a blur of phone calls, meetings with lawyers, and long hours spent poring over documents. Vivian didn't have the luxury of peace. The storm was real now, and Maya's fury was in full swing. Family members began to take sides, some reaching out to offer their support, while others remained loyal to Maya, keeping their distance from Vivian. It was like watching a fracture ripple through the family, each crack widening with each passing day. The air was thick with tension. Maya's passive-aggressive comments on social media began to grow sharper, more pointed. Her posts were veiled attacks, directed at Vivian, but cloaked in the guise of concern or innocent updates. "Family means everything," one post read. "It's hard when someone refuses to see what's best for everyone." Each time Vivian read one of these, a wave of anger washed over her, but she refused to let it consume her. This was not her battle to fight in the way Maya expected. Vivian's resolve was unshakable. She wasn't going to be the victim anymore. She was done letting Maya dictate the narrative. Ethan's messages were more frequent now, each one carrying a sense of urgency and guilt. "Mom, this isn't worth it. We're tearing the family apart." He said it in so many different ways, each message more pleading than the last. Vivian's fingers hovered over her phone as she read his latest text. She thought of the years spent walking on eggshells, trying to keep the peace, trying to keep Maya happy, trying to stay invisible. No more. She was fighting for herself now. With a deep breath, she typed her reply. "You've never understood, Ethan. This isn't about the family. It's about standing up for myself. I've been quiet for too long. I'm not going to apologize for finally being seen." She hit send before she could second-guess herself, before the guilt of disappointing him had a chance to creep back in. Ethan had never seen the things she had endured, never fully understood the weight of Maya's control, and maybe he never would. But this was her fight. As the days stretched into weeks, the family's support split down the middle. Some reached out with words of encouragement, others with condolences, and still others, her cousins, aunts, uncles, remained silent, unsure of what to say. The lines were drawn, but Vivian didn't have the energy to care about the divisions anymore. She had her own battle to prepare for. She spent hours in therapy, speaking with a counselor who guided her through the emotional toll of the fight. The conversations weren't easy. The therapist gently prodded, asking difficult questions, forcing Vivian to confront the deep-rooted fear and shame she had carried for years. But with each session, she felt herself shedding the weight of a lifetime of being silent. She wasn't just fighting for her inheritance, or her place in the family anymore. She was fighting for the right to live authentically, to take up space without apology. She began to reconnect with friends she had distanced herself from, building a new network of support that wasn't based on blood or obligation, but on genuine connection. Every time she spoke with someone who listened without judgment, who didn't ask her to explain or apologize for her choices, she felt herself growing stronger. She started to reclaim the life she had once imagined for herself, one where she wasn't a shadow, a side note in Maya's story. She was the main character in her own life now. But just as she began to feel the weight of everything shift, a letter arrived. It was from Maya's attorney. Vivian opened it slowly, her breath catching as she read the words on the page. Maya was counterclaiming, attacking her reputation in court, accusing her of undue influence over family members, claiming that Vivian's actions were the cause of the family's breakdown, that she was trying to ruin everything for her own selfish gain. The letter was filled with half-truths and distortions, but one sentence stood out above the rest. "The defendant's actions have been highly disruptive to the family dynamic and reputation. We intend to seek punitive damages for the harm caused." Vivian's hand trembled as she set the letter down, her mind racing. This wasn't just a fight for inheritance anymore. Maya was trying to destroy her reputation, her standing, her very identity. Maya was no longer content with just erasing her from the family's legacy. Now she wanted to erase her from the world. Vivian took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the letter in front of her. This was it. The moment Maya had been preparing for, the final card in her twisted game. But Vivian wasn't going to let her win. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Grace. "I've seen the letter. Stay strong. This is exactly what Maya wants. She's trying to provoke you. Don't let her. The truth will come out in the end." Vivian smiled at the message, the familiar weight of Grace's words anchoring her. She wasn't alone. Maya could file as many counterclaims as she wanted. Vivian wasn't going to back down. The court date loomed closer now. There was no turning back. As Vivian looked at the letter one last time, a fierce determination filled her. Maya wanted to destroy her. Fine. But Vivian had already made peace with the truth, and now she was going to make the world see it too. The storm was just beginning, and this time Vivian was ready for it. The courtroom was tense, a hum of whispered conversations in the air, punctuated only by the soft clinking of the judge's gavel. Vivian sat at the defendant's table, her hands folded tightly in front of her, every muscle in her body coiled. The case had reached its apex, the final moments before the truth would either stand tall or collapse under the weight of Maya's manipulations. She had prepared for this, but as the day wore on, Vivian found herself facing more than just the legal battle. This was a fight for her life, her dignity and her very identity. Maya's attorney stood at the podium, spinning a narrative filled with half-truths and exaggerated claims. Each word felt like an attempt to suffocate the truth, to bury it beneath layers of deceit. The defendant has sought to tarnish the family's name for personal gain, he said, his voice smooth, calculated. She has disrupted the family dynamic, spreading lies and creating chaos, all to take what isn't hers. Vivian's breath quickened, but she remained still, her mind focused. She had already anticipated this, the twisting of facts, the assault on her character. It didn't matter, she had the truth on her side. Across the room, Maya sat like a queen on her throne, her eyes cold and unwavering, her posture rigid. She was watching the drama unfold with a sense of triumph, as if she had already won. Vivian could feel the weight of Maya's gaze, but it didn't matter anymore. For the first time, Vivian wasn't afraid of her daughter's control. She wasn't afraid of the lies. As the day wore on, Vivian's lawyer presented the evidence, bank statements, legal documents, and testimony from witnesses who had seen the truth all along. Maya's forged will was exposed, her web of lies slowly unspooling. The more Vivian watched, the clearer it became. Maya had worked tirelessly to paint herself as the victim, to control the narrative, to strip Vivian of her power, her place in the family. But that was the past. This was now. When it was finally Vivian's turn to speak, the room fell into a charged silence. She stood slowly, every step measured, feeling the eyes of everyone in the courtroom on her. Her hands were steady as she adjusted the microphone, her voice clear as she addressed the judge. "Your Honor," she began, her tone calm but strong. "For years I've been silenced. I've been told my voice doesn't matter, that I don't belong. I've allowed my daughter to rewrite the story of our family, to erase me from it entirely. But that stops today." She paused, allowing her words to settle in the room. Maya's expression remained unchanged, but Vivian could feel the tension rising. The facade was starting to crack. Everything Maya has done, everything she said is an attempt to control not just this family, but to keep me in a place where I don't speak, where I don't fight for what's rightfully mine. She thought I would break. She thought I would stay invisible forever. Vivian's voice caught slightly, but she quickly steadied herself. "But I'm not invisible anymore." There was a pause in the courtroom, a moment of stillness before Maya's lawyer attempted to interject, but the judge held up a hand, signaling him to stay quiet. Vivian could feel the shift, the moment when the balance of power was tipping in her favor. "You don't get to control this narrative anymore, Maya," she said, turning toward her daughter for the first time in the room, locking eyes with her. "I'm not a side character in your story. I'm the author of my own." Maya's gaze flickered with something surprise, maybe fear, but she quickly masked it, her jaw tightening as she prepared for another attack. Vivian could feel the last remnants of Maya's control slipping away. The manipulations, the lies, all of it was being exposed for what it truly was. Ethan had been quiet, sitting off to the side, his face unreadable, but Vivian caught the faintest shift in his posture, a small movement of his hand, and then, to her surprise, Ethan stood up, his voice rising above the murmurs in the courtroom. "Maya, this has gone too far," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "I don't agree with what Mom's doing, but I can't stand by and let you do this. You've manipulated all of us. You've torn this family apart, and I'm done pretending it's not happening." Vivian's heart squeezed at his words, at the small but significant sign of support. Ethan had always been torn, sitting in the middle of their fractured relationship, but today he had made his choice. He was standing with her, finally seeing the truth. Maya's eyes flashed with anger, as she shot a glare at Ethan. "You don't know what you're saying," she hissed. "You have no idea what you're getting into." Ethan's gaze softened, but his voice remained firm. "I don't need to know more. I just know this isn't worth it. Not anymore." Vivian felt a lump form in her throat as she looked at her son, finally feeling the weight of the years of silence, the years of longing for him to see her, to understand. This was more than just a courtroom victory. It was a reclaiming of the relationship that had been fractured, a glimmer of hope for what could still be healed. As the day wore on, the courtroom drama unfolded, the pieces of Maya's manipulation slowly crumbling under the weight of the truth. Vivian stood strong, every word, every piece of evidence, bolstering her case. The walls Maya had built around her were coming down, brick by brick, and Vivian was no longer the passive observer. She was the one in control. When the final arguments were made, Vivian took her seat, her chest tight but her resolve unshaken. The judge gave a brief nod, signaling the end of the hearing. Vivian felt her heart thud in her chest, the uncertainty of the moment mixing with the certainty of the path she had chosen. The gavel came down, and the room fell silent. The judge's words hung in the air, waiting. Then a breathless pause. The decision was coming. The courtroom was still as the judge's final ruling was delivered, the sound of the gavel falling like the final note of a long, drawn-out symphony. Vivian sat motionless, the weight of the moment pressing down on her, as if the world had momentarily stopped spinning. Maya's forged will was nullified. The truth had won. For a moment Vivian couldn't quite process. She had prepared for the worst, for an endless legal battle, for years of trying to reclaim what was hers. But here it was in the stark light of the courtroom, victory, simple and unambiguous. She didn't react immediately, her eyes locked on the judge as he delivered his final remark. Maya had been caught, the weight of her manipulations, her control had finally come crashing down. Maya would face the legal repercussions, her power stripped away in an instant. But even as relief coursed through her veins, Vivian knew that this wasn't about money or inheritance. It was never about that. This was about reclaiming her place in the world, her voice, her dignity, her worth. She had fought for herself, and for the first time in years, she felt whole. When the proceedings ended, Vivian stood slowly, her legs a little unsteady but her heart lighter than it had been in years. She glanced over at Maya, who was standing at the far side of the room, her face frozen in disbelief. She hadn't expected this. Vivian could see the rage simmering beneath.